Okay.
Welcome to Focus on Albany. My guest today is my dear friend Leon VanDyke, and Leon is going to talk about the voting irregularities in the Democratic machine and possibly also talk about the uniqueness of the brothers. So, Leon, you go way back with Corning. From the time you came into Albany, was the $5 vote in practice at that point?
Yes, it was. It was very much in fact. I was surprised when I came. I came here in 1960, and by that time, well, I came in. They were giving out the $5 bill, and I was shocked at that because that practice had been all but gone in maybe Albany and a couple other cities. It certainly was gone in Philadelphia, where I was born and raised. I mean, corruption was there, but it was a different kind of way. Albany was sort of a little throwback. So I was surprised, and I took the $5 bill. I was wondering what this guy came to the house and gave me $5 for, and my mother told me, "Oh, that's where you vote." I said, "Oh God." How nice of the guy. but but that was the $5 vote. And that was 1960 when I came here. And in terms of the brothers and that, as you know, that was one of the things that we demonstrated against.
Let me ask you this question, Leon. When I'm sure it was the committee person that came up and handed you the $5 for a vote. Now, did they go down with you to the polling place to make sure you voted correctly?
No, but they had people believing that. People believed that they had a way of knowing how you voted. In a certain way, they did, because the way the machine ran the committeeman system, the committeeman knew everybody in his precinct. He knew the dissenters and which so, and he also knew of how many people in his precinct voted Democratic and how many voted Republican. So from that, if he saw one or two in his district, he could figure the guy that he argues with all the time had probably voted for him or something like that. But also, they were not above. They had a guy named Jimmy Williams, and he was a black guy. He sat outside the mayor's office. I'm not quite sure what Jimmy's title was, but unofficially, he was considered the black political mayor. You know, he had access to the mayor, so to speak. But Jimmy had a precinct down on North Pearl Street, right the same precinct where the brother's office was. So we knew Jimmy intimately, and Jimmy did not mind if you come to vote to walk you to the voting booth and stand there while you vote. And most people, knowing Jimmy, because they had to come to Jimmy and ask him for jobs, and Albany's machine was such, like any machine that's run. If you wanted a teacher's job, if you wanted a city job, you had to get a blue, what they call, I think it was a blue card that was from your committeeman to say you was all right. And that was for almost any city job. You know, so people were not apt to say to Jimmy, "Get from behind me," and Jimmy would feel offended. So, but people believed that they could tell you they knew how you vote. But anyway, in breaking down that system, this is after the brothers had did almost a 6-month campaign of closing down the Empire State Mall from building construction, and that's another story I'll try to get to. But the $5 vote was sort of put the brothers on the map in terms of citywide, because this is something nobody ever challenged the $5 vote. So we decided, along with a number of civil liberties lawyers who were coaching us as to what was legal and what was not illegal, but by people like Victor Lord, Greta Powell, and they coached us as to how we could pick it legally and all that. And so we decided, and every time at that time was the brothers was by meetings, by votes, and we decided that we'd do it and what time we'd do it. And we decided that we would do it after the guys got off of work. Some of the guys got off of work at 5 o'clock, and we'd go to the polls and we'd pick it. Well, we had an office at that time. We just had an office. And so a couple of guys who weren't working had wanted to go and pick it that afternoon. And so they said, can I ask me, could they go pick it? And you said, okay. So it was three guys which go and pick it. And then we had this student volunteer named Walter. And Walter was slighter built and what have you. And he wanted to go. He asked me to go pick it. I said, yeah, Walter, you can go. Go ahead. So anyway, they went, this is on Clinton Avenue, and they went on Clinton Avenue to the poll and they picketed it. And I'm sitting in the office and doing whatever I was doing in the office at the time. And they came back about 20 minutes later and said, please tell them they couldn't pick it, and if they pick it, they're gonna lock us up. So I said, well, let's go back down there, you know? So we went back down there, start picketing. And I remember this lieutenant came and the sirens are blowing. They made a big dramatic thing of it. And I said, Leon, if you pick it, by this time, they knew me a little bit. They didn't know me as well as they were going to know me, but they knew me a little bit from the construction days. So they said, Leon, if you think this is against the law of that direction, I said, well, my understanding is as long as we stand outside the 100-foot pole, that this is so and so. And he says, well, we don't give ourselves. So I said, well, you better get your wagon. He goes, I'm not going anywhere. So they locked us up. And it was like the four of us. Robert Jean Dobbs was one of them. And this young college kid named Walter. And they arrested us. And we're sitting in a cell. And at that time, you have to understand one of the things about that, and I marvel at these guys. The machine was nobody to oppose. They had arrest people for just looking at it the wrong way. And also they would beat you up, you know? So it was no small thing. So we're sitting in jail. Next thing I know, maybe a half hour later, other brothers come in. And they were arrested. And that was a moment where these guys who were just working class guys, who were very principled and heard that we were arrested, and they knew that they had said they would come. We came home, put down their lunch bucket, and told their wife, I'm going to jail, and not knowing what would happen to them. And that was the thing that binded us as a group, as brothers. We knew that we could rely on each other. But also I did another thing in Albany. When people heard that these young Black men had got arrested, it excited the whole city. Ministers, college kids like Greg and yourself, and white suburban women, Black women, came, left their house and took up a sign that said, don't sell your soul for $5, to the point that the machine couldn't arrest any more people. They just made the people stand outside the poll, right? So after 9 o'clock. So around about 8 or 9 o'clock that night, we're still in jail. The lawyers come to us, Vic Lord, Greta Powell, and so many of them. I can't even, I would say about a dozen of lawyers. And they said, Leon, they said that if you plead guilty, they would suspend the sentence and let you guys go. Everything by the brothers at that time was done by vote. So the guys who was in the cell, and it was like we had five, because there were so many people, that 5 or 6 in the cell and down in the police station. And almost to a man. And I said it because they were all men that were arrested that particular night. That wasn't all that were men that were protesters, and most of them were brothers. Until a man said no. I said, no, we're not. One, tell him we haven't did anything wrong, so we're not going to plead guilty to nothing. So just get their cells open, because we're not get the county jail open, because we're not pleading guilty.
Mhm.
So that was a strange thing to the machine. The machine just didn't know how to handle that. I mean, at the time, I'm looking back retrospectively, the machine didn't know how to handle what's going on with these guys. What the hell is going on? They didn't know what was going on with the students. They didn't even know that we knew each other, and we didn't. But it was an idea. It was an idea of whose time is coming. It was somewhat not. I'm not trying to equate it as big, but it was somewhat with Rosa Parks refusing to give her seat to a white man. It was somewhat like that. It was an idea whose time has come, and people knew that they were wrong. So what happened? So what happened was they held a special night court at 11 o'clock at night. They let us out, and we came out. And I came out of the police station. When I came out of the police station, there was like, I don't know, at least 1,000 people out there waiting for us to be released. I mean, it was just amazing. But the thing of it is, it was a whole bunch of points or things that was put in there. But for us, is that we knew, that told us we could count on each other. That if we, and that's what bound the brothers.
So, Leon, let me ask you this question. I remember speaking one time to Polly Noonan, and I said to Polly Noonan,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I had told her that I had heard that the committee people knew how people voted by the sound of the click. Did you ever hear that?
No, I didn't hear that one. But I think people believe that a lot of people believe that, they because that was the sort of urban myth that the machine wanted to push forth. We know how you voted, and we know how you voted. We'll get you. We'll kick you off of welfare. And that's the thing. I had a story. I told you, Greg, this story, because Greg is nice enough to let me bend his ear all the time. About that, the impact that the machine had on people. And this just wasn't like poor people. It was people who had contracts. The machine had this thing that's all about, no matter what, they'll get you. They know. But in fact, they had a system. The machine was made up of Democratic committeemen who were absolutely loyal to the machine, almost to a man. And these guys were world placed, and the political system is by precincts, and committeemen got their benefits from turning out. Committeemen had a precinct that where only 40% voted. The precinct captains would ask them, "What's wrong with you? What's going on? You ain't doing your job." But because the jobs and everything, to a certain extent, went through the committeeman system.
Mm-hmm.
And the committeemen, even though they didn't necessarily live in the precinct, they knew they knew their system. They knew who lived in the block. A lot of times, these committeemen were ministers. They were real estate guys, slum landlords. They were lawyers. My friend George Harder was a committeeman out here in Bethlehem, So they knew their system. They knew their people, and they reported back. So a lot of times they if you lived in Albany and you were Greg, they know what Greg Bell thought because they interacted with you every day. They seen you going to work and what you call it. People tell them, say, "Oh, Greg, he's a socialist." Well, they wrote him off right away. Cynthia, she works for WNC. Well, we'll write her off. But by and large, the committeeman system, and that was just not with Albany. That was throughout the country. That was throughout the urban political system. That's the way that ran.
So, Leon, would you say that the machine in Albany was one of the more stronger machines than in other parts of the country? Because, when you talk about the machine in those days, if you voted the wrong way or whatever, you lived in fear. Was that throughout the country?
That was throughout the country because that was the way they controlled it. That's the way they controlled it at Tammany Hall. That's the way they controlled with the Prendergast machine in Boston. You lived in fear that the machine knew everything, but in fact they did. I mean, well, I lived on Lark and First Street. I knew everybody on that block. I knew what their politics was, et cetera, and so the committeemen whose job it was to know, they didn't have to know certain kinds of things, but most of them, they had to know what your politics were, how you voted, whether you were committed, whether they could rely on you. They needed, because a lot, like my committeemen on Lark Street where I lived at was a guy who owned a bar on Lark Street. He was a committeeman, and he was selected because of that, So, and that was typical of political machines.
Okay, let me ask you this question. The committee people, no matter where they lived, they knew who their constituents were. So when it came time for petitioning, they knew exactly where to go to get a petition signed. Am I correct?
That's right. And that's absolutely correct. Because that was their job. That was their major job, is getting signatures, and the more signatures they got, the more they got patted on the head and got rewarded. You know what I mean? That's the way they got rewarded. I in talking about that, about the brothers, in terms of how deeply embedded that we became in the hearts and the minds of people. This is a year after the fight out vote, 1967, we ran 4 candidates for office. 4.
Okay.
For the county legislature alderman position in Arbor Hill.
Okay.
We got enough signatures. Think of this. We got enough signatures to get on the ballot for all 4 candidates.
But they weren't the people that the committee people would go get the signatures. So you had to go out there and just find people to sign, right?
The thing of it is, this is what I'm talking about. We became the people's champion. We didn't realize this at the time. The brothers became the people's champion, and I'll try to get to that.
Okay.
But not just for the fight out, but for a whole bunch of things. But the fact, and this is what made Mayor Corning and I know it. They said, how the hell guys do that? People who sign, and we got not just people who didn't sign their signatures, but we got people who did sign their signatures of these wild men, as far as the Mayor Corning was concerned, were able to go and knock on doors and get people to sign the petition, knowing that they had to give their name, their telephone number, and their address.
Mm-hmm.
And they signed it anyway. Now, at the time, we didn't realize the significance of that. This is hindsight, what I'm talking about now, which is always 2020. You know, but the fact that we could get enough, I forget what it was, 5% or something, that we could get 5% of the people in that ward to sign our petition said reams to the experienced political. It didn't say much to us neophytes. You know, we just thought, well, you know, they know us, we know them. And they signed our petition. We got it to get on the ballot on the Democratic line, and to get on the ballot the Liberal line. 5% of the Liberal line in Arville at that time was maybe 3 people. I don't know.
Okay, let me ask you. Let me ask you this, Leon.
Yeah.
With the committee people, they would know exactly what doors to knock on, who would sign the petition. So, for an insurgent to go around who wanted to run for office and get their name on the ballot, did they knock on doors? Did they just like stand out on the street corner and get signatures? How did they do that?
So we knocked on doors, and in part we knew we were going to be challenged. So George Harder, another fellow named Victor Lord, and a couple other guys, Dennis Slanker, I believe, they walked with us to make sure that we collect the signatures correctly, because we knew no matter how the Pope could have signed us, the machine, the next step was getting through the machine challenge. And that was the other thing, is that, and this is just my supposition here, they didn't challenge us. And maybe it was because we're going to beat these guys anyway. But we took them to court. We took the county legislator, who was a black guy by the name of Homer Perkins, and the alderman. We took them to court for not living in the district. So we took them to court, and the decision of the judge was that they didn't have to live in there. They didn't, that level of office was so low. If there was an alderman, yes, they had to live in the district, but they didn't have to live. I don't know, and we didn't challenge because we didn't have the money to challenge it. You know, we said we were going to challenge, but we didn't have the money to challenge. But they didn't challenge us. And the thing of it is, I think, and I look at hindsight, if we had had a more competent campaign manager, and we were more experienced, we could have won that in '67. Even with as bad, and I say that not because I was a campaign manager, and looking in hindsight and what I know, I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know anything. You know. I've never even been in a campaign before, you know. So I was running by the seat of our pants. We went to all the churches. Let me tell you another story about the impact that the machine had on people. We'd go to churches, and there were only certain churches would let us in, black churches or white churches would let us in. We'd go to the white churches to raise money, you know, and we go to the black churches in Arville, you know, in terms of getting people. So Riley Jean, who was, he was like my right-hand man, really. We were like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, you know, and he was running for alderman, and he thought he was like the reincarnation of Malcolm X, and that's the way he talked. Very, you know. So we go to this church, and Robert Dean gets up and he does his thing, and then there was this guy sitting in the choir, older guy, the senior student, and he was sitting there, and he was crying. And he was mumbling, "Oh, they're going to," you know. So afterwards, we asked the people, "So what was that guy crying? What was going on?" You know, they said he said he thought you guys were going to make him not get his teeth, and his feeling was that the committeemen knew that this young pastor let these radicals in. And that he knew that, and so the committeemen would knock him off of welfare, and he couldn't get his teeth. It shows you how, to me, well, it shows you how people perceive what the machine knew, how powerful they were, and how evil that they were. That the mere fact that somebody would let a minister would let guys like us come in and speak against the machine, that the machine would say, "Well, you a member of the church, and why you let that happen? And therefore, you're going to lose your teeth, or you're going to lose your welfare." That happened so many times. We became, in terms of talking about the brothers, we became so involved in so many things. Now, the machine and people thought, oh, the brothers just went and found people. No, people came to our office and knew that we would fight for them. So if they were kicked off welfare, they knew we would go back down welfare. Wow. and fight for it. Or
hey,
for housing.
Leon, our time for today is over.
Yeah.
So we'll talk again.
We'll continue,
yeah. Do you want to continue talking about the voting irregularities and all?
Yeah. So
okay.
So, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have to end for today. So you've been listening to Leon VanDyke, the leader of the brothers back in the 60s. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Focus on Albany. If you like this show, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and we'll talk again. Thank you, Leon. Have a great day.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's good. Oh, excuse me.